Hey, this is C&D Channel. I'm Chris. This is MMA for you. I'm going to be doing an MMA Q A for this month of June 2014. Before I get into the Q&A, I'd like to give some shout-outs here. Shout-outs to Matty G, Kevin Barber, J Ronan 1000, Brandon K, Carnius797, Philern 99, Dynamic Sphinx, Blue Zone 28, Mikey G789, Chris Bryan, John Doe, Gonzaga Fragrance 206, Rusty Nips, Aaron Brady, Blake Williams, Perfect Machine, Blackett 123, KZC Ram, Florentino Ariza, Chituis, Rani 413, NT, Sohail Fahimi, Rainbow Telly, and David Williams. So one of the questions here, the first question I'll answer is from Gonzaga Fragrance 206. This is actually way back in like January or something like that. Now I finally have time to get around to answering this question. And what's just kind of cool about this question has to do with Japanese fighters. And the climate's actually kind of changed, so it's actually kind of fitting that I answer this question now. So, what do you ask? Do you think we will see a Japanese UFC champion in the next 5 to 10 years? Why is it that Japanese fighters couldn't hack it into UFC, whether it's because they are one-dimensional fighters or lack any real competition or legitimate opponents under fighting promotions in Japan, which pad their records and how maybe give them a false sense of their true talent? Okay, back when you asked this question, I would have said no. We will not see a Japanese UFC champion in the next 5 to 10 years. What happened within that time? Well, two prospects came along that really changed my mind about that question. One of those prospects, Michinori Tanaka, who just beat Roland Delorme at 135, looked really good. And Kyoji Horiguchi also looked really good. I think he beat Daryl Montague in his last fight, and he's going to fight Chris Carriazo at 125. Both of these guys, I think Tanaka's probably going to cut to 125. They're still both really young, too. So, yeah, the next 5 to 10 years, it's not... I mean, there's stiff competition, but considering these guys' age at 125, maybe they won't beat Mighty Mouse. I don't know. But there's, like, hope now. Like, there's legit, like, blue-chip prospects from Japan fighting in the UFC. You know? That honestly look like they could be title contenders, could be top 10 fighters. It helps they're fighting in a new division in 125. Even if they fight at if like Tanaka stays at 135, I mean, the division as it is right now is at a phase where it's actually one of the thinner divisions in the UFC. But there's a lot of prospects, so he's kind of just growing with the prospects at 135. So, and of course if it goes to 125, it's a thin division, same deal. You know, he can just grow with the prospects that will that are starting to really get into the division. One thing that hurts Japanese fighters, though, in general, one is flying. When they fly to like the U.S., it's a really long flight, from what I hear. And not just from fighters. I hear it from just like normal people. Yeah, when I fly to Japan, it's fun. When I fly back from Japan to the U.S., they say it's just they get really bad jet lag. And that's one thing too. When they fight in the U.S. or non-Japanese countries on the other side of the world, you get a lot of jet lag. The other thing is a lot of Japanese fighters don't cut weight very much, and eventually you can just see like Carl Uno versus like Gleison Tebow or something like that. Or even in Bellator, there's I forgot who it is. is it like Umatsu or something? I forgot his name. But he fought like Travis Marks or something like that, and Bellator, Ueda or something. I totally forgot his name. But they looked like they were two different weight classes. One thing that was mentioned by Shinya Aoki, though, and I think Ishinakami, was about the training conditions in Japan. It's a really highly congested, like Tokyo, for example. It's really highly congested. You don't have these huge facilities for training. There's very small training areas. So instead of integrating, they're confined to these really small spaces for training. It's like a room, like a really small room, from what I heard. And I can't speak from personal experience, but just from what I heard, especially from like Aoki, is that they'll train every singular aspect of MMA, jiu-jitsu, clinch, wrestling, striking, but they can't really practice. They don't really just have the space to practice all aspects of the game. It's not just like one guy in a room. It's like a bunch of guys in a small confined area. So you can't really, like practicing is very limited to what they can practice just because of space. I hear rent was probably like a lot there too. So, yeah, the training conditions in Japan, from what I hear, just as far as training MMA, aren't the best, just because they have to train every singular aspect of MMA, but they can't really train it all together, and that that really hurts a lot of Japanese fighters as well. Like I said, though, we got some new prospects here. Tanaka and Horiguchi look really good. I think as UFC Fight Pass, has more events in Japan and just in Asia in general, they'll probably get more Japanese prospects. I can't think of any other big time prospects coming out of Japan, especially any that would be like a blue chip prospect. But otherwise, like I said, Horiguchi or Tanaka as UFC champion in the next 5 or 10 years, not outside the realm of possibility. Do I think they'll be champions? Probably not. I mean, I can see, but it's just, you never know. You never know. These guys legitimately are very good fighters for their age. They're probably just going to get better and better. Fight in relatively small divisions. So, in 5 or 10 years, yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible. Whereas, if you asked me this 6 months ago when these guys really didn't really put themselves on the radar as much, or like a couple months ago, it's like, yeah, I don't think Kawajiri's going to be a title, going to get a title. I don't think Gomi, because there was a lot of these aging Japanese fighters coming into the UFC, and it's like, it's like their last hurrah type thing, Kawajiri lost to Clay Guida, good fight, but clearly lost to Guida. But now you have some young Japanese guys that legitimately look pretty good. The next question after that, Damano asks, which fighters do you have successful picks with, and which fighters do you have unsuccessful picks with? Oh man, the easy one to pick with the unsuccessful picks is always Cub Swanson. For some stupid reason, I just cannot pick this guy correctly. I picked him to lose against Charles Oliveira, Dennis Seaver, Ross Pearson, Mackin Semizer, George Roop, and he won against them. I picked him to win against Ricardo Lamas and Dustin Poirier. He lost against Lamas, but I got the pick right against Dustin Poirier. I am picking him to beat Jeremy Stevens. Let's hope he does. I am just really bad at picking Cub Swanson fights. I don't know what it is. Sometimes it's the case of like it's hard to see this guy past who he was. I think I mentioned this before. It's like in the WEC, he was like the most like mid-tier guy. I mean, he was just an utter mid-tier guy. He can win some, but he'll lose. And I lost like Chad Mendes, if I'm not mistaken. I think he got Lamprey. Lost to Aldo. He's just kind of like this middling fighter, like a very middling fighter. And then lately, he just has looked really good. Ricardo Lamas, another guy I just can't pick really well. I picked him to lose to Jose Aldo. He's won so many fights that I picked him to lose. Like, I picked him to lose against like Hiachioki, Eric Koch, and Cub Swanson, and he won all those fights. Same deal with Ricardo Lamas. Like, it's hard for me to see him past that guy who got knocked out by Yuri Alcantara. That lost to who else did he lose to? I forgot. I want to say like Castillo or something like that. It's hard for me to see him past that mid-level guy. And even now, I can't see it. It's like with him, it's like I can't really see the eliteness in him, I suppose, because it's kind of like he's not a great striker. He's a good wrestler. I wouldn't say he's a great wrestler. I mean, he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, but he's not someone that you necessarily fear on the ground. I suppose he has elite level ground and pound. I mean, look at the Eric Koch fight, for example. But otherwise, it's hard for me to see him as anything more than like an upper mid-tier guy at best. It's weird. It's very hard for me, and it's almost the same with Cub Swanson. But I'm starting to see it more with Cub Swanson these days, especially with the striking. But with Lamas, it's just I can't really see past like. I can't see what's elite with him. I think it makes me underrate the guy a lot. It's a very big problem I have with picking some guys too. Another guy that I tend to underestimate Alex Caceres a lot. Picked 3 of his losses. I picked his losses correctly, but only like 1 of his wins correctly, like against Roland Delorme. But I can't pick the guy to win a lot of times. Once again, it's the same deal. This was the guy that lost to Jim Hedges, Mackin Semmerser, and a lot of guys. Looked very middle of the road. Actually like a lower level fighter for a while. You know what I mean? And it's hard for me to think like, wow, this guy's becoming elite. I mean, he really is though. He just beat Sergio Pettis, and he's been looking really good. He used to be a really big liability as far as submissions go. If you look at a lot of his losses, they're mainly by submission. He still has a problem with getting hit clean. I mean, Edwin Figueroa hit him clean. Sergio Pettis hit him clean a lot. I think Roland Delorme may have dropped him or wobbled him. I'm not too sure. So he still has that problem of getting hit clean, but I'm starting to see it with Caceres. I don't see him being in favor, but I'm starting to see him being a much better fighter. Another guy I'm not super successful with, George Rube. I'm kind of getting a beat on this guy. I can always pick when he'll lose, but I don't think I've ever picked him correctly when he won. I mean, his last fight, he fought Destin Camara. I picked him to lose. Brian Bowles, I picked him to lose. There's so many fights I always pick him to lose, and then he ends up winning. The ones that I pick him to win, or the ones that I pick him to lose that I get correctly, I'm starting to get a beat on the guy. It's heavy-handed guys, because he has really bad defense in the stand-up. So it's generally like I picked Francisco Rivera to beat him. And the way he beat him is exactly the way I thought he would. It's like, oh yeah, he's a really heavy-handed guy who can swarm him and find his chin. Okay, but guys that are primarily more grappling-based guys like Destin Camaro that really don't have that great of striking. I mean, even Brian Bowles, I mean, he managed to drop Roop, actually, with an overhand. But he's still, like, I'd say he's still primarily more of a wrestler, grappler type. And the thing with Roop, if a guy's, like, okay or decent in striking, but a good grappler, Roop can win. But a more heavy-handed fighter, that's who I see Roop losing to a lot more. Like, Cub Swanson's another good example of a guy who beat George Roop, you know? So that's the thing. I'm starting to get a beat on Roop. I'm going to pick him to beat Rob Font. And, man, that's a pretty tough fight for Rob Font, to be perfectly honest with you, for your first fight in the UFC. It helps that Roop is just huge at 135 now, you know? But, yeah, successful. Johnny Hendricks. Man, I picked this guy's, like, last 9 fights correctly, you know? Even his losses. I picked him to lose against Story. I don't know if I was... I think I was doing these shows during that time. I know I picked him against to lose against Story and to GSP, and he did. And I picked him to win every other fight after that. The one that really made me proud, though, was Johnny Hendricks, John Fitch. Because I remember John Fitch, you know, perennial top 10 guy, the perennial number 2 guy at welterweight, you know. And it's just like, oh, man, John Fitch, too much experience, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, dude, Johnny Hendricks, NCAA division, well, you know, he's got all the wrestling accolades you can ever want him, guy. Heavy-handed guy. He can defend John Fitch's takedowns. Probably has better hands. Then Johnny Hendricks knocks him out in less than a minute. You know, and it's like, yeah, that one made me really proud. I'm kind of bragging here. I hate to brag, but you know, yeah, Johnny Hendricks is a guy I've managed to pick really well. Another one, Alexis Davis. I have picked her last 6 fights correctly, including a loss to Sarah Kaufman back in Strikeforce. Like, some of them are close too, you know, like Alexis Davis versus like Shayna Baszler. It's like, oh man, Baszler looked pretty good up until that point. A lot of people are criticizing me for picking her against Carmouche. I'm like, no, Carmouche ain't that good. You know, Carmouche is like, I don't want to use the word can crusher because she did beat like Jessica Andrade and Caitlin Young, but honestly, she's not that. She doesn't really have much of a resume that should reflect her ranking. You know, it's just, you know, with Cummings, she's really strong, pretty good wrestler, not a great striker. And Alexis Davis, I say this all the time with her, I think she is the most well-rounded, probably top 3, if not number 1, most well-rounded female fighter out there. Does that mean she's the best? No. You know, I think Ronda Rousey's gonna beat her. But, you know, as far as striking, wrestling, and jiu-jitsu go, yeah, Alexis Davis is at least good to great in every aspect of MMA. I don't think she beat Jessica I, but I picked it correctly. She won by split decision. Should not have gotten the victory there, to be perfectly honest with you. But yeah, Alexis Davis, I'm pretty good with her. I was pretty good with Yoel Romero until the Brad Tavares fight happened, because I was pretty good with Brad Tavares too up until that point. But I was pretty good with Yoel Romero. I actually picked him to lose against Fei Zhao, and I picked him to win up until the Brad Tavares fight. That was a huge mistake because Yoel Romero just dominated Brad Tavares. And I'm not gonna lie, on a lot of fights with Yoel Romero moving forward, I'm probably going to pick him to win. I'm very high on that guy. And besides certain champions, like, I did pick Cain Velasquez, but Junior Dos Santos the second time. I just knew the first time that they fought, that wasn't, like, the right Cain Velasquez. That was a very rusty Cain Velasquez. You know, I was pretty good about Cain Velasquez Picked him to beat Brock. I was super high on him. Jose Aldo, Ronda Rousey. Some of the champions. Pretty easy to pick. Some guys that are going to be really hard to pick. Weinman's going to be hard to pick just because if he beats Machida, I'm probably going to pick Weinman to beat like Jacare, Belfort, and Rockhold. Those are like the next, and Musashi. Those are the next potential contenders for him. I'll probably favor Weinman over those guys. But even then, man, honestly, guys like Luke Rockhold has really good takedown defense. He's tall and lanky, and might be able to get his kicking game going on against Chris Weidman, for example. I mean, it's not a great stylistic match for Weidman. I think he's going to be hard to pick moving forward. As far as champions go, Johnny Hendricks might be pretty hard to pick too. Like, if he fights Rory McDonald, that would be pretty tough. In a rematch against Robbie Lawler, I'd still pick Hendricks. Even a guy like Lombard, it's just because Hendricks, for as much as better as he's looked, he's still not the most defensively sound. His technique still needs a lot of work. I mean, he really punches from his hip. His hands where his hip is, and he'll throw he'll spam left hands. Who else? There's a couple guys with Hendricks that would be pretty tough. I thought Renan Barao was a pretty surefire pick for bantamweight, for the next 5 contenders, and then TJ Dillashaw just blows him out of the water. Unless it's Faber, I'd probably favor TJ Dillashaw in a lot of his fights here on out. But yeah, some guys, other guys, I do nominally well. I pick some well, and I don't pick them very well. It's just sometimes I'll get it right with some guys, sometimes I won't. But some guys particularly stand out to me because with the unsuccessful picks, it's always guys I tend to underrate. Most of the time, it's guys I just totally underrate. Sometimes I overrate guys too. Charles Oliveira is a guy I just tend to always overrate. I don't think I've ever, except against Frankie, I don't pick the guy to lose, and I probably should. It's just I tend to overrate some guys due to potential, and I gotta really watch out for that. I did that a couple times actually, overrate guys just based on potential more than what they've actually shown, and kind of overlooking the weaknesses. Definitely something I gotta avoid doing. And another guy that's unsuccessful. It's always these guys that were mid-level guys that became elite. Jeremy Stevens is a guy I've just been really unsuccessful with. His last 3 fights, I picked him to lose. He won them all. And it's just, I always underestimate Jeremy Stevens a lot. I have a very hard time picking Jeremy Stevens fights. I picked him all right to lose. I picked him to lose against Eve Edwards or Donald Cerrone. It's really hard for me to pick him to win because he's also a guy I just tend to underestimate. He's really improving, but he's improving his grappling. His grappling used to be a really big liability. So it was easy to pick against him. Joe Lozon beating him. Yeah, sure. Pick Pettis to beat him. Sure, But then there's other guys that he'll beat where it's just oh man, I totally thought that Stevens would lose that fight. He's a guy who's a mid-level guy, and now he's elite. He has really heavy hands, and his grappling's really improving. So, but he's just a guy I just tend to underestimate, mainly because it's hard for me to see certain guys being more than guys that are entering elite that were mid-level guys for a very long time. are pretty hard for me to get a really good gauge on. And I think that's a pattern. Cub Swanson, Ricardo Lamas, Alex Caceres, and Jeremy Stevens. So definitely something I gotta watch out for because man, I've been picking these guys to lose a lot and they keep winning. So even Ricardo Lamas, I have him losing against Hakan Diaz. So it's just like, I don't know. He's just the type of guy that can easily prove me wrong. Next question. Dan Sparrow asks, do you think that flyweights can ever be pay-per-view and television ratings draws? Yes. I think, a lot of people say like, oh, well, it's little guy, they're low guys, and, heavyweights draw more because of just the, I don't want to say like physical appeal, you got these huge guys, they're kind of larger than life, and then flyweights look like, some people will say they look like children, or else they look like guys that like you can beat up or something like that, right? The fact of the matter is, though, I mean, I don't know if it's as much as the weight class, more so just the personality. If you get a guy that's really good on the mic, that has like a really fan-friendly style. I mean, let's just say like Faber or something. If he had Faber at 125 and he was champion, he can probably draw, because he's a really good fighter. He has a fan-friendly style, and he just has that type of personality, that people are drawn to. So, yeah, I think flyweights can be pay-per-view draws. You just need the right. It's a combination of skill and personality, though. The problem with flyweight right now, though, is that, and this is just from a drawings, ratings and pay-per-view draws perspective, is that Demetrius Johnson he's not a draw because, one, he doesn't really have the personality for it. And a lot of people will say, oh, you got to trash talk. You got to be Chael Sonnen. It's not that you have to be Chael Sonnen. You don't have to trash talk. GSP is not a trash talker. I mean, obviously he had, he had the Canadian thing going on. I'm trying to think of a guy that's like Junior Dos Santos. He's a guy that is a perennial good guy. Doesn't trash talk too much, fan-friendly style, so it don't have to be like a trash talk or anything like that, but Demetrius Johnson, he's a good guy, but I wouldn't say for the most part, I don't know him personally, but from what I've heard from him in interviews, he doesn't always come across like the most compelling personality. It also doesn't help that, when you're fighting like Ali Bagiatunov, hey, hardcores know that Ali Bagiatunov is a really good fighter. He's an elite fighter. The problem is, casual fans don't know him. Like, who is this guy? You know what I mean? So, I mean, it's a combination of things. It's to be a successful pay-per-view draw, from what I've seen, it's a combination of look, skill, and a certain type of charisma that will attract people to watch you. Some guys have like 2 out of the 3. Like Cain Velasquez has a great, he looks kind of great, like a guy I wouldn't want to mess with. He fights in a way that is relatively fan-pleasing, you know what I mean? He beats people up, he had a career performance against, like, Brock Lesnar, but he doesn't have a lot of charisma, and that can hurt his pay-per-view drawing power, Well, it's a guy like a Brock Lesnar, I mean, his fights actually tend to be pretty fun to watch. He looked larger than life. And the guy, I mean, horseshoe up. I'm going to take this horseshoe up his ass. And, this guy could I'm going to get on top of my wife. I mean, this guy is just a soundbite machine. You know what I mean? But it's really hard. It's hard to find that guy that's going to have all of those components. Joseph Benavidez, if he became flyweight champion, or maybe like Ian McCall, if he became flyweight champion, I can see him being something of like a ratings draw or a pay-per-view. I'm not talking about a guy that can like get 1 million pay-per-view buys, but just be like somewhat, something more than like less than the average. A guy that can get like more than the average. And the average right now is like 150,000 pay-per-view buys. Maybe more than the average. That's what I mean. I don't mean like some like crazy ratings draw. But yeah, like that's the thing. Ronda Rousey is a really good example of just like charisma that makes her compelling to people, whether they love her or hate her. It doesn't have to be. They don't have to be loved, for example. They can be hated. Skills and looks. She has that. She has it all. Anthony Pettis looks like he'll probably, if he can get fights, he's a guy that I could see being a pay-per-view draw. TJ Dillashaw could be something of a pay-per-view draw. You also need the right opponent too. GSP wasn't made instantly. He had Matt Hughes, he had BJ Penn, he had foils. You have to have the foil. It's a combination of parts makes a guy must-see TV or a pay-per-view draw. Anderson Silva didn't become a huge pay-per-view draw until Chael Sonnen came along. You need that foil. Even Chuck Liddell, he had Tito Ortiz, arguably like Randy Couture, but like Tito, that was the big foil. And generally speaking, except for, I don't know if BJ Penn had like a big foil. You could maybe say like Matt Hughes or GSP, but he lost to like GSP. And he did manage to beat Matt Hughes, but BJ also had all of them too. He had the look, he had the skill, and then he could talk on the mic. It's, if you want to know more what I'm thinking, go to bjpenn.com, and this guy is just, when he coached tough, just the stuff he said or did, it just, he was like the coolest guy in the room, that's the thing. The wham was in reference to, that one Asian fighter, I forgot his name. For the life of me, I totally forgot that guy's name now. But yeah, he'll do things or say things that are just really compelling, So yeah, I think a flyweight can be a pay-per-view draw. It's just you need. It's always just a mixture of those components, The individual needs to look, skill, and charisma. If there's a foil, then that really helps. Like if Dimitri, let's just say Justin Scoggins, right? 21, he's like 21, 22. I'm really high on this guy. Keeps moving up the ladder. And he can talk too. He's a guy actually I can see be something of a guy that would be something of a draw, This guy, and he just starts talking smack about Demetrius Johnson. Maybe has a close fight with him. Maybe beats him. I don't know. It can actually be, you can definitely put more notoriety to the division. It's a combination of things, though, And like I said, people who are pay-per-view draws, there's usually, it's never instantaneous. It's usually a combination of things that happen. A passing of the torch is another thing that can work. There is no passing of the torch in flyweight. Flyweight has Demetrius Johnson. That's it. You didn't go from like Carlos Newton to like Matt Hughes to like GSP, and you keep passing that torch. You know what I mean? It's just not there. So you know, in the future, yeah, they could. It's just finding that right guy, finding that right formula, seeing if all the pieces will come together. Okay, next question after that. F5626 asks, with InvictaFC on UFC Fight Pass, what other programming can you see on Fight Pass? What do you think of InvictaFC on UFC Fight Pass? Okay, the first question. Dana White's already talked about having that the BJJ event Metamorphosis on UFC Fight Pass. It's a possibility. Josh Barnett and Chael Sonnen are going to compete on the next Metamorphosis card. I believe they're like co-promoting with Lion Fights on the 4th of July weekend. Lion Fights is definitely one I can see, and they're based out of Las Vegas that I can see on Fight Pass. I believe there's reports already coming out that they're partnering with Valley Tudo Japan. So, and they're gonna do like some sort of round robin tournament that's gonna last like 8 months or something like that. So they've already got Valley Tudo Japan, and another organization that I can see on Fight Pass, RFA. I know Ed Soares is in charge of RFA. See a lot of their champions going to the UFC. They just got, let me think. There were a couple guys from RFA that just... I mean, Kevin Casey just came from RFA, but there's some bigger name guys. Sergio Pettis. Oh, jeez, how did I forget that guy? For example, came from RFA. Just moved on to the UFC. So a lot of guys that come from RFA. You see in the UFC, I can see them once their deal with Access TV is done. Being on the UFC Fight Pass makes a lot of sense. Yeah. What do I think about InvictaFC on the UFC Fight Pass? Great. I would have rather have seen them on TV, personally. I don't. If they were on TV, though, I wouldn't have wanted them to see them on, like, Access TV. There's MFC, Legacy, and, like, RFA, all on, like, Access TV. You know, Invicta would just be another one in there, you know what I mean? They'd just be another, like, organization. It's hard to stand out in Access TV. If they... You know, I was hoping they can get like an FS1 or FS2 deal. I thought that would have been kind of cool. That didn't happen. But, you know, Fight Pass, good fit. You know, they've always had a good working relationship with each other. It makes sense, you know, for the UFC. Now that they're going to have the strawweight division, which consists primarily of former InvictaFC fighters, you know. Cesar Torres, Carlos Esparza, Cleta de Gadalha, John Calderwood, Beck Rawlings, all those, you know, all of them came from InvictaFC. So it's a good fit, you know. I just hope, one thing I hope is that they just have more events. I mean, more than four a year, to be honest with you. I would like to see them put on an event, quite honestly, every 2 months. 6 events a year, if not more. I don't think they're starving, you know. Women's MMA, I mean, as it is, I mean, it's hard for women to, from my knowledge and from what I've heard, it's hard for female fighters to find fights as it is. So it's not like there aren't like female fighters chomping at the bit to be a part of the InvictaFC roster. You know, I mean, when I see fight cards, I generally see no more than 2 women's fights per fight card. And that's being lucky, you know. Even in the UFC these days, if I see a women's fight on the fight card, it's kind of rare. It's still relatively rare. So, yeah, I hope to see, now that it's on Fight Pass, I just hope to see more events. I hope that they won't have all the streaming problems. I hope that they can better monetize their product. I mean, this is an organization that when the streams failed, Shannon Knapp gave all the people who paid their money back. Shannon Knapp's such a good fit for InvictaFC as well. She can definitely take it. She's already taken women's MMA very far. I mean, she's definitely someone that is the perfect flag bearer for women's MMA and to represent an organization like an InvictaFC. One thing that's interesting about InvictaFC is they do have star power. One thing they do have is Chris Cyborg. That's really interesting just because she fights at 145. She is their champion. And, Cyborg versus Rousey is the big fight in women's MMA. Maybe this will allow Chris Cyborg. I know she's going to fight Ediane Gomez in the next fight. Maybe this will allow Chris Cyborg to get an easier time to get in the UFC. They also have Michelle Watterson, I think, is someone who can be definitely a big star. I don't know if she can hold her title, though. That's the problem. I mean, she has the looks. She is a skilled fighter. She's still a very flawed fighter, though. You know what I mean? And she does have, that charisma that, compels people to see her. That's the thing. And then there's, Barb Honchak at 125, who's good. If they can get Marina Shafir at 145, I think they'd have another potential star there. Ronda Rousey's, friend, really high-level judo, compelling person, has charisma, has the looks. They should definitely try and make a bid for Marina Shafir at 145. So it's really interesting just because InvictaFC itself does have stars, and with them having weight classes that the UFC doesn't have, gives them the capability to have stars that the UFC won't have. But yeah, just overall, great stuff for InvictaFC. I'm hoping they announce the next date to the date for the next event. I know that they've aggressively tried to bolster the roster. There's always rumblings of even adding the 155-pound women's division. It's interesting. I'm really curious to see where InvictaFC goes from here. They have a very loyal fan base. I am one of those very loyal fans. So I just hope the best for that organization. Every one of their events has been something of a very special event too. You know what I mean? It's just one of those things. They've always felt like, I guess, special. I don't know what else to say. It's kind of like a big deal when an Invicta. It's like a rare occurrence, But man, it'll be a long time if the rumored August-September date is when their next event is going to happen. That's a long time between events, and I'm hoping for good stuff from them, really. So yeah, that's pretty much it for my MMA Q&A for June 2014. If you guys have any questions for me, hopefully sometime in July I'll be able to get maybe get Dave to do this as well. Maybe I'll be able to do another Q&A. So if you have any other additional questions, put them in the comment section. If you have any comments, put them on the comment section. And yeah, that's it for MMA for you. Thank you guys very much.